Loss is our common denominator. None of us will escape it. None of us will outrun death. What do we do with the space in between that is our lives? You're dead, America, and where you died grew something worse. Words from Elizabeth Alexander and Denise Smith start our sermon on life after death. It addresses the most religious of subjects. In the past, I've suggested that religion can be understood as what binds us together, and we are all bound together by death. When Elizabeth Alexander wrote, "None of us will outrun it," she was thinking of us individual mortals. But she might have been writing of all being. Reptiles die, insects die, birds die, flowers die, the tight bud breaks into blossom, then drops from stalk a mottled wilt. Trees die, the boughs bending, falling in the wind until they at last decompose amidst fungal mycelium. You, me, everyone, everything dies in the end. Even the good green earth will die. The sun will burn away long after the last star has shone and the last human tongue has spoken the last human word. The universe itself will fizzle or collapse. These truths lead to two fundamental religious questions. What do we do in the space in between that is our lives? And what is life after death? All of us are bound up by these queries. We approach them this month as part of our ongoing series, Future Visions, Future Selves. As you might recall, over the course of a year, we are approaching different aspects of the future, societal, personal, and planetary. Together, we're asking questions like, what does the future hold? How might we prepare for it? This morning, we approach them as, you're dead, America, and where you died grew something worse. This morning, we approach these questions as the nation plunges into crisis. The world's richest man has declared a war on the poor. Acting more like a corporate raider than a public official, he set out to dismantle USAID, the government agency responsible for providing the bulk of international aid that the United States gives to other countries. Millions of people in Africa alone rely upon it. The savage cuts that are being made mean that in just Kenya, 40,000 health workers have lost their jobs. That country is home to 2 large refugee camps. Together, they home 700,000 people. Most of what they rely upon comes from this country's financial contributions. All aid to South Africa is being halted. The president has declared that the nation's Afrikaner minority, the community responsible for the brutal apartheid regime, are victims of racial discrimination. The landmark program PEPFAR, attached to USAID, has dramatically reduced the spread of and mortality from AIDS in that nation. It's estimated that in the region of southern Africa, it saved 26 million lives. Its disappearance, the hollowing out of Kenya's healthcare system, and the defunding of the refugee camps will likely lead to thousands or even hundreds of thousands of deaths in the next 4 years. Across the globe, the withdrawal of international aid by the United States will probably lead to the deaths of millions. You're dead, Nations, like birds, like flowers, like humans, die. Amid the calamity of the hour, it is reasonable to wonder if the United States is dying. Long-established constitutional order appears to be passing away. We may well be confronted with the question of national life after its death. For USAID is not the only institution that the man we might label President Musk is trying to kill. He is reported to be going after the Department of Education and the Department of Defense next. Mass firings have been reported at the FBI and CIA. Every single federal employee is supposed to have received an email titled "Fork in the Road." It offers the option of receiving full pay and benefits through the end of September in exchange for immediate resignation. The email is accompanied by threats that no one's job is safe. It strongly hinted that many of those who refuse to resign will be fired anyways without adequate severance. Unelected President Musk is trying to gain control of the Treasury Department's data and and payment system. It's unclear to what extent he has. But whatever is happening, many federal payments are frozen. All of this is illegal. Congress, not the president, is supposed to control the nation's finances. Union contracts, government policies, and congressional legislation are supposed to regulate the hiring and firing of federal employees. Judges have temporarily blocked much of what is happening. Nonetheless, it appears that the United States is in the midst of a full-blown constitutional crisis. John Naughton, a columnist in The Guardian, calls the situation a thoroughly modern coup d'etat. Mike Masnick, another journalist, has described it this way: a private citizen with zero constitutional authority is effectively seizing control of critical government functions. The Constitution explicitly requires Senate confirmation for anyone wielding significant federal power, a requirement Musk has simply ignored as he installs his loyalists throughout the government while demanding access to basically all levers of power. You're dead, America, and where you died, something worse grew. The potential death of the constitutional order offers two insights about our mortal conditions. First, no one knows what comes after death. Second, all of us will live and do live after death. Religion can help us prepare for living in death's aftermath. So let's examine each of these insights in turn. No one knows what comes after death. Many traditions and people approach the matter with certainty. Buddhist and Hindu scriptures described our fate as an endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, perhaps broken by an enlightenment that allows us to escape into final oblivion, and perhaps not. Most Christians speak of the somewhat unscriptural schema of heaven for the righteous and hell for the wicked. And there is satisfaction in imagining where the lords of wealth are headed. Some add purgatory as a place in between. A fair number of African and North American indigenous traditions offer narratives in which the dead become ancestors who watch over us as part of a great cloud of witness and bless the living as we go about our messy experiences of life. Even humanists speak with a confidence that I cannot muster. There is nothing after physical death, writes my friend Anthony Pinn. At best, we remain alive only in the memories of those whose lives we touched during our living, he continues. I only have confidence in the belief that whatever fate awaits one of us awaits all of us. I agree with the old Universalist sentiment expressed by the great abolitionist and Unitarian Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. We are all bound up together. Maybe there is a heaven to which we are all headed, possibly after being cleansed of our earthly sins, or maybe in an immediate blaze of glory. Alternatively, there might not even be the consciousness of unconsciousness, the absolute oblivion of nothing. But truly, no one knows what comes after death. You're dead, America, and where you died grew something worse. Such agnosticism is warranted for the fate of nations. Historians, sociologists, political scientists, economists, and politicians all like to pretend that they have great insight into the future. Many a Marxist has predicted the inevitable collapse of capitalism. 30 years ago, the philosopher Francis Fukuyama wrote with some confidence, "We may be witnessing the passing of history as such. That is the endpoint of mankind's ideological evolution and the universalization of Western liberal democracy as the final form of human government." Such a perspective seems almost tragicomic as we witness efforts to turn the United States into a plutocracy, government by thieves, and the president and his allies prepare to loot public institutions. In the face of their actions, it can be easy to feel despair. In reaction to their campaign of shock and awe, it might seem like an invocation of George Orwell's dystopian quote is in order. If you want to picture the future, imagine a boot stomping on a human face forever. Sometimes when I get stuck on such an image and fall into a sense of powerlessness, I recall a conversation I once had with the photographer Nigel Dickinson. Nigel has taken pictures of all sorts of social conflicts and marginalized communities around the world. He's seen some horrible stuff and somehow maintains, in spite of it, a generous spirit. Our exchange might have been an argument. With Nigel, you can never quite tell. But however I might characterize it, it took place during President Trump's first term. I was in despair about the awfulness he had unleashed upon the world. I had little confidence then, as I do today, as I lack it today, that the leadership of the Democratic Party was going to save us and stop him. I feared that the world was plunging into an existential crisis from which it would never recover. All of those fears may still be justified. However, when I offered my anxious litany for the future, Nigel responded to each item in the same way. And here you have a part, for every time I made a point about something appearing awful in the future and inevitable, he would say, "Nobody knows." My worries about the future of democracy, nobody knows. My concerns about the climate crisis, nobody knows. My funk about the rise of plutocracy, nobody knows. Nigel's point is one well captured in words from Joe Strummer of The Clash: the future is unwritten. We can speculate, We can look to history. We can look to science. We can imagine and we can forecast and we can try to figure out what's going on and what's going to happen by consulting 100 books. But really, nobody knows. It's quite possible the attempts to enshrine government by the rich, for the rich, into the marbled halls of Washington will spark a spirit of democratic renewal. Yesterday, I went to an organizing fair put on by the Democratic Socialists of America. Under a blue sky and accompanied by music and beer at the Axelrod, there were hundreds of people learning about different organizations here in Houston trying to make our city and our world better. I suspect a couple of thousand people passed through the event during its 6-hour duration. Certainly the most well-attended affair put on by the political left that I've been to since I moved to Texas. Most of the individuals there were a good 20 years younger than me, the future of Houston. What happens next? Nobody knows. We are denied certainty in life as we are denied it in death. But it appears to be a human condition to crave certainty. Most of us want to take gravity as our guidepost. We want to be able to proceed through life as if it was as certain as picking up a stone and dropping it and watching it inevitably fall to the bottom. But life lacks that predictability. There's an old Taoist tale I find helpful when I want certainty or feel confident that one tragedy is inevitably going to lead to another. You might have heard it. It runs this way. Long ago, there was a peasant whose horse had run away. His neighbor commiserated with him. He replied, "Who can know if it is good or bad?" The next day, the horse returned, bringing with him a herd of wild horses. The peasant was suddenly rich beyond his possible imagination. When his neighbor commented on his good fortune, he replied, "Who can know if it is good or bad?" The next day, the peasant's son tried mounting one of the wild horses. He fell and broke both of his legs. Again, the neighbor offered the peasant his sympathy, and again the peasant replied, "Who can say if it is good or bad?" The very next day, the army came to the village and forcibly conscripted all of the young men into service far, far away to fight in some stupid war. The peasant's son was exempted from military service because both of his legs were broken. You can never know what is going to happen when we are in the midst of things. Who can say if it is good or bad? Nobody knows. Death is the great undiscovered country. As with people, we do not know what will happen when nations die. We can speculate, we can look to history, but really, nobody knows. What we do know is this: at least for a long time, life will continue after death. We can prepare for life after death, both as individuals and as communities. Here at First Houston, we try to help you do just that through our workshops on end-of-life planning and our grief groups. All of us live after loss. All of us are grieving. We will all live after the death of loved ones. But in our congregations, we create a space to hold each other as we continue to live after death. Elizabeth Alexander described our condition as the beginning, the end, and most of the time in the middle. In our grief groups and through our time together as a religious community, we try to make sense, to live into the uncertainties and certainties of the time in between. We know that it will be a time containing celebration and grief. Life is as replete with loss as it is with beauty. What shall we do with all of it? How shall we prepare for death as we live our lives? How do we live after the deaths of loved ones? These are questions we all must answer. My own approach to them has been to seek out community, for it's easier to live with uncertainty if you have a bit of companionship along the way. Last night at the jazz concert we hosted here, we had an illustration of this. The bassist who had been booked for the big gig got stuck in Galveston. Tex Allen, the band leader, did not despair. He's part of a community of Houston's jazz musicians, so he was able to pick up the phone and with about a 30-minute delay to the start of the gig, rustle up a bassist who came and was a fine replacement musician. The show went on, and it was a great show. Consider it a small illustration of how community makes it easier for us to live through the uncertainty of life and the uncertainty of life after death. And here I conclude with a reflection of the death of the current constitutional order and the uncertainty that we are living in. For here it seems clear that whatever political institutions and arrangements have held sway for the last decades, they are in the process of dissolution. What will come next? Nobody knows. But I do have a wild proposal to stop the looting and transform the moment into one of democratic proposal. In opposition to mass layoffs, I suggest that federal workers everywhere stage a massive sit-down strike. They should report to work, and then whatever happens, refuse to leave until President Musk is no longer President Musk, but has been forced back into the role of a private citizen. All fired federal workers are returned to work, all funds unfrozen, and the power of the purse is given back to Congress. The modern coup d'etat we are facing is borrowing tactics from the playbook of corporate takeovers. Sit-down strikes have been some of the most effective tools in confronting such events. I encourage you to watch Naomi Klein's 2004 film, The Take, for examples of how this happened in Argentina. Here in the United States, we have a more recent instance. In December of 2008, the Republic Windows and Doors factory in Chicago declared bankruptcy. The company's management quickly declared that they would close and sell off all of their assets to pay their creditors. No mention was made of severance pay for the workers. So in response, the entire workforce occupied the factory. They refused to leave until they were given 2 months severance and earned vacation time. But within a few days, they had actually won more than just their initial demands. They had won their jobs back as banks agreed to loan the company the money to stay open. And then a couple of years later, the management agreed to actually sell the factory to the workers, where today the New Era Windows Cooperative continues to operate as a worker-owned cooperative, manufacturing and selling windows throughout the Chicagoland area. The beauty of such sit-down strikes is that they prevent normal business operations and stop a company from selling off its assets. They ensure that workers, not management, maintain control of the physical workplace so that business can either go on as planned or not as negotiations continue. Such as President tried to organize. He's now been impeached and is presently under house arrest. Such strikes in the 1930s built the middle class. They were eventually made illegal, but it seems that President Musk and the elected president and their minions are ignoring the law as they see fit, so why should workers obey it to their harm. Reviving such tactics could change the balance of power, especially if congressional Democrats loudly and visibly support them. Few people voted to gut Social Security, Medicaid, or Medicare. Few of us want a massive distribution of wealth from the middle classes to the richest through budget cuts, budget deficits, and massive tax slashes. Few of us want to see millions of people die. All of this is coming unless this modern coup d'etat is ground to a halt. Would such tactics be effective? Nobody knows. But the old world is dying, the new one is struggling to be born. Living through the afterlife of one might allow us to play midlife to another. I cannot promise certainty, but I know that whatever happens will happen after death. Or I do not know what will happen after death, but I do know that the end of the United States, as we know it, might be on the horizon. I can promise you that as we face it, it will be easier to do so in community. For in community, we can dry each other's tears as we mourn. In community, we can celebrate beauty where it can be found. In community, we can imagine new possibilities. And in community, we can join our spirits together in song and remind each other that when friends by shamed are undefiled, how can I keep from singing? In the face of uncertainty, living together after death, facing death, how can we keep from singing? May such words and the community of which they help us speak allow us to live together after we each experience the deaths of our loved ones and as we face the possible death of the nation. To that, I invite the congregation to say, Amen.